In part two, we're going to cover some of the basic concepts. Those basic concepts are going to be the importance of a routine, the right-hand search method, and the box method. There's entire books dedicated on the importance of a routine, but ultimately routines take complicated tasks and simplifies them. The more you do something in the same or similar way, the more you stop thinking about how to do them. Take driving, for example. You don't actually think about driving, you just drive. Complicated tasks become second nature, and that's because of those routines. If you are not constantly thinking about how to inspect, you can now focus on what you are actually inspecting. The inspection process becomes routine, and then in turn becomes faster. Ultimately, the routines will simplify. It'll reduce that brain drain, reduces downtime, improves your focus, and increases speed. Right-hand search pattern, fairly simple concept. If we place our right hand on the wall and then walk around that room, we will go ahead and eventually return back to where we started. So that's what we're going to do, not physically touching the wall, but walk around as if our right hand was attached to it until we get back to where we started, which is usually an entrance or an exit of that room. The last thing that we're going to do before we leave a room is just go ahead and scan that ceiling, inspecting the ceiling in its entirety. Now, once you finish the kitchen, you have the ability to leave that kitchen out of two doorways. It doesn't matter which doorway you choose. What you want to do is put a false wall at the other one. So if we were to pick the right hand doorway there, then we'd put a fake wall at the bottom one, or vice versa. The bottom doorway is where we're going to leave out of, then we'll put a fake wall on that right one. But let's say we leave out of the right one. Wherever we start, that is where we also want to finish. And the reason is that if for some reason we leave out of the south one or the bottom one and then end up going around the house and ending at the right one, we have the possibility of missing this entire wall here. The same concept can be true for Jack and Jill bathrooms, or basically any room that has multiple entrances and exits. Whichever door that we enter, we're going to put a false wall on the other. So wherever we start, that entrance is also going to be where we exit. And the reason is that if we leave out or enter into one door and leave out of the other, we have the ability of potentially missing an entire wall or room. So we'll look at this in its entirety as we walk around the house. Again, focusing on that right wall. And if we just focused on the right wall, like in hallways, we'll get the other side of that wall on the return trip down that hallway. Always being sure to enter and exit out of the same doorway. So that way when we finish, we'll complete back at the start and not miss anything. Now the same concept can be true on a left-hand search pattern. So on a left-hand search pattern, as we go around, we're just using our left hand as the guide as we go through that house. Until we get back to the end. The box method and the ins and outs of it. Box method can be broken down into basically 3 steps. First you inspect the outside of the box, then the inside of the box itself, and then the components. In order to do the components, you're going to follow the components as they enter the box, following the path that they complete until they leave the box. In a practical situation, when you open up underneath the sink, you may see a drain leak, a electrical wire that's been frayed or amateurly wired. You may have a kitchen sink faucet that's leaking or a drain that's leaking, causing water damage to the kitchen sink base cabinet. And you have a lot of things going on because a lot of things can go wrong. And if it's been neglected or even hasn't been looked at in a while, they may not even know what's happening down there. So, in order to train our eyes to see everything, because when you have a lot of big things in there, all those things I just mentioned, and you just go from one defect to the next, you may miss something that's not as obvious or not as terribly wrong as a leaking drain, i.e. the high loop. Did you even look at the high loop because you were so busy looking at all the other different aspects? So when we're underneath the kitchen sink or using the box method in general, we are, in a sense, training our eyes at what to look at first. And in the box method, we're going to be looking at the box itself. Again, doing the exterior of the box. Once we have those doors open. The interior of the box, the sides, the top, the back. Then when we get into the components or the ins and outs of it, we pick one. Here we're going to start with water. As water comes in, it first goes to the dishwasher. That water goes to the dishwasher and then comes back out on the drain and dumps into our disposer there. Next, that water is going to go up to the faucet. And we're just following the path of the water at this point. Eventually that water is going to come down the drain, into the main drain, come down the other drain, through the disposal itself, and then eventually out. We also have electric in here. So we're going to inspect the electric itself, and then follow the electric as it comes into the box, and then electric as it goes out is traveling along the same path, which you've just done. So you don't necessarily have to follow it as it goes back out. My favorite area to inspect with the box method is electrical panels. It's because there's so much going on and it can become overwhelming. So just like under the sink or with the boxes before, we are going to inspect around the exterior of the box itself. We'll go ahead and open that door. Now we can inspect the front of the dead front panel. Don't forget to inspect the back of the dead front panel as you take it off. I usually like to, when I take it off, put it down, the dead front panel itself, backwards. So that way I don't forget to look at the back of the dead front panel. On the interior of the panel, we're going to go ahead and inspect the box itself first, as if none of the components are in there. No breakers, no bus bars, no wires or conductors, etc. Then we'll follow the ins and outs of the box. So as the electricity comes in, it comes in from the meter through the enclosed panel that we can't tell. We can peek at it from above, look at the service entrance conductors, the main breaker. Then the electricity path is going to follow down those back bus bars. We're going to follow and try to look behind the breakers in a sense, through the crack and any open spots, including the bottom. Then the electricity goes to the breakers themselves. So inspect the breakers Then it goes to the conductors or wires. So I first check for compatibility. Then I go ahead and I follow those conductors until they leave the panel. Now electricity goes inside the house, eventually coming back to the panel, neutrals and grounds. So I'm going to look at the neutral and the grounding bars. And then I can follow that right to the grounding and bonding wires. As those grounding and bonding wires leave the panel, we can follow the ground as it disappears. And the bonds, in this case, are fairly easy to follow. Sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they just go in with the conductors inside those panels. Our water bond is actually diving down into the dirt and then eventually coming up at the hose bib down the way. And now, when you get to a sub panel, you can tell on this one where the electric is coming in. Check out the box itself. We're going to open it up. Again, dead front panel, front side, back side. On the interior, we're going to follow that electric as it comes into the panel to the main bus, down the bus bars. Check out the breakers, compatibility, follow the conductors as they leave the panel, eventually coming back out on the neutrals and then the ground. And there you have it. So you've taken this extremely visually complex component, breaking it down into different sections, and then again following the ins and outs and following how that electricity follows itself into the panel to the way that it leaves out of the panel is a nice way of teaching your eyes what to look at next. And of course, anytime you find a defect, you would stop, take a picture, make your notes, etc. But then you can pick up right where you left off and keep following that electricity. By the end, you've covered the entire box. The attic is another area that I treat as a box. The outside is going to be covered with the roof and the exterior, but the interior I treat as a box because you can't necessarily move around or do a right-hand search pattern in there. Now, attics can be big, but a lot of times you are stationary, whether you're on the working platform or just peeking up out of the attic access. So, the sheathing is going to be the top of our box. We'll inspect the top of our box. I treat the trusses as the sides and go down the trusses, and the insulation as the floor of the box. Anything in and out, i.e. our heating and cooling ducts, I follow those as they come in and out in prospective areas. So again, inspecting the box interior itself, tops, trusses being the sides, the floor being the insulation, and then the ins and outs, whether it be plumbing vents, room vents, bathroom vents, kitchen vents, and again heating and cooling ducts as they come in and out. And now we've covered everything in this, in a sense, visual picture. Another attic. Here we can do the interior actual sides, the roof, the trusses as additional sides, insulation as the floor, ins and outs being ventilation, so a gable end vent there, and then we have soffit vents out in the corner. Ins and outs, low pressure suction line, HVAC equipment for that heat pump, probably another bathroom vent as it comes up and out. The box itself, then the ins and outs. You may also find electrical. Follow the electrical that comes into the attic. And then same thing with plumbing, as plumbing runs in the attic, whether it's supply lines or vents. Typically we find our second half of our heating and cooling system in the attic as well. So here we have a heat pump. Same is going to be for a gas furnace. Difference being, gas furnace we're going to typically open up or peek inside, but treat it as a box. So do the outside of the box, inside of the box, follow the ins and outs as stuff comes in and then goes out. Low pressure suction line comes in, and then our condensate drain line comes in or goes out of the box to the exterior. Follow those. And ultimately, those attics are just large boxes. And again, you might have to take visual snapshots or look around, and then just each visual picture that you have, you're going to be doing the box itself, then the ins and the outs, and then you can comfortably feel like you've covered the entire attic methodically. So these basic concepts are going to be applied throughout the rest of the series as we go through all the different portions of the inspection process. In part 3, we're going to cover some of the general rules. So look forward to that in the next video.